This is Barry Martin Snyder. Our websites are luminousself.com and wayofthechrist.net. As we come into the Easter season, I felt this deep calling to share with you the journey I was taken on, to understand the ultimate gift of Christ, the ultimate grace. And it covered a period of a number of years where I was taken on a journey to understand that through the study of the Shroud of Turin and actually working with the energy and consciousness of the quantum hologram that exists within it. Everything that we need to know about Christ can be discerned through the Shroud of Turin. The immense blessing grace that this being brought to the planet is encoded in it for all who have eyes to see and a mind open to really grasp what happened during his crucifixion and resurrection. You've probably seen by now the picture of Christ that I carried for many years that purportedly came from the Shroud of Turin. It was actually painted by an Italian man named Agemian. Ariel Agemian was his full name, who was given access to the shroud for a number of days and painted what he saw, which is a very accurate depiction of how I see Christ's face. This brought me to the Shroud of Turin. Intuitively, I knew that there was something profound there. For those of you who don't know what the shroud is, it was purportedly the burial cloth of Christ. It's about approximately 14 feet in length, and encoded on it is a ghostly image of a man from both the front and back. It's been purported to be the burial cloth of Christ for quite some time. As I began to research the shroud, I came across a book called The Mysterious Shroud by Ian Wilson, with photographs by Vernon Miller, who happened to be in Santa Barbara, where I was living at the time at the Brooks Institute. I did meet with Vernon, and it really began my deep journey in understanding the shroud from a sacred scientific standpoint. Vernon was part of a multidisciplinary team that went to Turin, Italy, where the shroud is housed, in 1979. That group of scientists produced what is the now famous STURP, or Shroud of Turin, research project. "24 scientists and technicians, including a group from JPL and NASA, brought their latest technology from the space program to study the shroud. It was a scientific inquiry, but everybody knew the underlying question really was, is this really the burial cloth of Jesus Christ? I've placed a picture here of the shroud for you to see with your own eyes from the positive and negative perspective. The negative actually shows you more accurately the features, and the positive is less discernible, but it's how it appears on the shroud. I'm going to cover some of the features that appeared on the shroud and what the team of scientists came up as they studied them. one of the things you'll notice in this obvious image of a man, that there are wound marks and blood flows throughout the image. A group of pathologists on the team really took a deep look at those blood flows. Many of them you can see come down over the forehead, and they were created by an irregular pattern that resembled, amazingly, something created by a crown of thorns. The pathologists were also able to differentiate between the venous and arterial blood flows, a knowledge that an artist would not likely have had. Also, as they studied the angle of the blood flows, they saw that they were exactly in line with what a man whose arms would have been raised in crucifixion would have created. As you're already starting to see, what I'm doing here now is giving you the journey I was on to understand what I now conclude emphatically, that this is the burial cloth of Christ. But I'm going to present this from the STIRP research and other things so you can come to your own conclusions. When you look at the image of the back of this man, you will see many dumbbell-shaped like images all over the back, and actually went the whole way down to the thighs. There were forensic pathologists there. A forensic pathologist are pathologists who try to determine what caused wounding and death. And when they studied this, they concluded that these marks the result of a severe beating. As they tried to place what could have caused this, they did some research and they found that there was a device called a Roman flagrum, which was a whip carried by centurions at the time. The goniometry, I'll spell that, Goniometry, was a way they could reproduce through computer simulation what caused these wounds. And the model showed the calculation of the impact angles was exactly what would have happened by a man who was whipped. What occurred next was totally unexpected and revelatory. All the pictures of Christ typically show the wounds in the hands, where the nails were purportedly placed to hang him on the cross. But in the image of the shroud, you'll see the blood flows and the wounds are on the wrists. The blood flows are definitely there, not in the palms of the hands. As the forensic pathologists discovered in their research, they found that a French surgeon named Pierre Barbeau had also noticed this anomaly in the 1930s. And what he did was get a bunch of cadavers and literally went through nailing them to a cross like Jesus was. And he found that every time he tried to place the nails through the hands, they would not support the weight. Literally, the skin ripped and the hands came loose. A being could not be hung by nails through the palms. But what he did find, that when the highly compact metacarpal bones in the wrists were nailed to the cross, a body was easily supported. In the sepia image, which is the actual image, you can see the blood flows in this sort of light brown. Well, as they brought microscopes into it, they found that there was a brown substance on the surface of the cloth. But the question was it blood? So they took small samples of it, and they found that it was blood. And more importantly, it had a very high bilirubin content. Now, bilirubin is something that forms in the blood only of people who have experienced severe trauma. It's secreted somehow by the liver under traumatic conditions. And sure enough, whatever this blood was, it was from a man who had been subjected to extreme trauma. It got very interesting when the team of scientists from Los Alamos and JPL brought their high tech into this consideration. They wanted to find out what made this image. And it had always been posited that it was a pigment added to the cloth. But as they examined the image, that was definitely not the case. There was no pigment, there was nothing added to the cloth. In fact, it was the opposite. The image was created by a reduction or loss of the material in the surface of the fibers. There was a rapid oxidation that had occurred that might be related to a high acceleration of aging of the material. The only thing that they could posit could have caused this was a highly advanced optical laser. But of course, that did not exist when this image occurred in the Shroud centuries ago. And they tried to find other instances of such images that were known to have been formed by oxidation and rapid reduction. What they found was something very similar to what was found in Hiroshima and Nagasaki after the nuclear bomb went off. Imprints very similar to those found on the Shroud were found on the sidewalks on sides of buildings in both of those cities that were caused by rapid oxidation and a loss of material substance. I set to contemplating this, and in a very heightened state, what I was shown was this. What happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was obviously a nuclear explosion. What happens in a nuclear explosion, which is what causes so much energy to be released, is that higher dimensional energy, which is what scientists are trying to get in touch with 0 point or quantum energy, which they realize is infinite. There's more energy in a cubic centimeter of higher dimensional energy than all the world produces in a year. In atomic explosion, as fission happens, there's literally a veil rent in the interdimensional membrane, and all that higher coherent light energy from the fourth, fifth dimensions and beyond floods through, and there's so much energy released into 3D that's what causes this massive explosion. This had to be an interdimensional event. And what I was shown was that when the moment of resurrection happened, there was an interdimensional release or shift of Christ's body from a third dimensional level to something higher. And that's what imprinted the image on the Shroud. I felt compelled to follow the trail of this this logic to see if there was any reality to it. And as I read more into the results of the STIRP team, it was confirmed. Two of the physicists from Los Alamos, Doctors Jumper and Jackson, became aware of a piece of equipment called a VP8 analyzer, which they used to study the surface of the moon. And it was capable of making three-dimensional renderings by interpolating shading data from two pictures taken from different angles. So in other words, a picture taken from two different angles would cause shading that could then be extrapolated to develop relief or depth. Somehow these two decided on a lark that they should bring this VP8 analyzer and see what happens when they apply it to pictures from the shroud. This was done after the STIRP team was in Italy. This was just over lunch, they got the idea to do this. So they went back to the lab and got out one of the pictures, a single picture that Vernon took of the shroud, and put it in the VP8 analyzer. Now remember, the VP8 analyzer was able to create depth by using two pictures taken from different angles, and the shading would interpolate to create depth. This was one picture they put in. There was no shading. But to their amazement, when they ran the image through the analyzer, a three-dimensional image emerged. There was absolutely no physical, scientific explanation for this. This image was turned into a statue which now resides in the Vatican, because somehow they got it, as did I. As I contemplated this, there was only one thing that seemed logical, that this two-dimensional picture contained three-dimensional information. And that validated this idea that an interdimensional process had been involved in creating the image on the shroud. In other words, higher dimensional information had been packed into a two-dimensional image. And this almost completely rules out the possibility that the shroud image was a human creation, for no known means existed to encode three-dimensional information into a two-dimensional image. Certainly not at that time. Jumper and Jackson kept working on this because they were fascinated, and they found that again and again one picture produced these holograms, these images. And really this seemed to indicate that the shroud image was a holographic in nature. A hologram is a virtual image, an exact three-dimensional replica that can be projected into space and seen in the round. Holograms are created by using a laser beam to record a three-dimensional image onto a special film, creating what's called an interference pattern. A laser image goes through what's called a splitter, and the beam goes into two separate pieces, and one goes directly and shines on the image, and the other one is bounced off of a mirror and hits the image from another level, creating this interference pattern. When these two waves of light come together, it creates just an interference pattern. It just looks like waves. There's no picture. There's just like waves of information. But when one takes a laser and shines it through that interference pattern on the film, a three-dimensional object, a virtual image, is created in space. So this confirms that the highest probability is that that image on the shroud is also a holographic interference pattern that came from a laser-like beam of light that encoded the information into the shroud, which can then be extrapolated by shining a laser back through it and creating a holographic image. Where this took me in my contemplation was that a laser is coherent light. It doesn't have any chaos in it, like all light does. It's like photons all aligned in perfect synchronicity. And that Christ's body, his physical body, had indeed emanated a field of coherent, higher dimensional light, which imprinted the image on the shroud as an interference pattern, and the VP8 analyzer had simply unpacked it for us all to see. I knew I was clearly being taken on a journey overlit by the Christ to reveal this information so I could share it with others. So I would sit after I got this information and these revelations would come through. And what was coming together was very clear. The resurrection was really the translation of the body of Jesus from one dimension to the next, creating an entirely new outer manifestation of the being we knew as Jesus. And this supported what we knew from the New Testament story of Mary Magdalene meeting the Christ in the garden after the resurrection. At first, even she, who was his closest disciple, didn't recognize him. She was also his twin flame. So something radical had happened to his appearance. He also told her not to touch him. My sense of this is because this new higher dimensional form that he was in had not yet stabilized. A whole new body was forming. I was struck by this insight that this is the most incredible thing that may have ever happened. And it took me back to the Bible and things that Christ said. He said, I am the resurrection and the life, and no one comes to the Father but through me. What I was shown was that through his resurrection, Christ Jesus had opened up an interdimensional doorway and left a template behind that was the completion of the process of death and resurrection. I consider all this is being revealed now, here, right now, quote unquote, at the end of time, when humanity is about to make this leap. And all this information about what Christ really accomplished, what really occurred, Jesus accomplished as the Christ really occurred during the crucifixion and resurrection, was now scientifically explicated for us to get with our modern sophisticated minds. That what Jesus did in that tomb is something now that would be available to all of us. I didn't know where to go with this next, but I knew I was on the trail of something really, really important, and I had to keep going. I had to use all my scientific understanding and knowledge that I got as an undergraduate in chemistry and pursue this on my own. And so I did. And I will, in the next excerpt of this story, I will explain the research I did and what unfolded from there. And all this is in our third book, We Are the Awakening Christ, if you want to study this more in depth yourself. So much love and many blessings, and the next excerpt of this will come very soon.